Yes, what was that? Okay, I think someone was trying to say or ask a question. You can unmute yourself and answer or ask.
Sir, I was just telling difference between climate and weather.
Yes, tell us.
Sir, climate is a long-term factor, whereas weather is a short-term factor.
Exactly. Weather changes in short span of time. Climate is a long-term phenomenon. So, when we say climate, it includes rainfall, light, wind, temperature, and then we have this edaphic. Edaphic means related to soil, where we have soil, soil pH, minerals that are present in soil, what sort of topography. And then we have these different biotic components. So when we say climatic, we see rainfall, light, wind, temperature. Now we know that what is the importance of light. Without light, there will be no photosynthesis. So that is the first step of starting life. So we can also call this as primary production. Photosynthesis means primary production. Okay. So algae would require light, CO2, and in the process it produces some biomass. Okay. So you will be able to recall that reaction 6CO2 plus 6H2 that gives us this organic molecule. That's basically a simplistic representation of formation of organic components from inorganic components, and the process is known as photosynthesis or primary production. So this is the first step we have in production. So algae are also known as producers. So next, after abiotic components, we have biotic components. We have these producers, consumers, and decomposers. Producers are also known as autotrophs. Autotrophs means those which can use inorganic forms of carbon. So based on carbon, we have two types of organisms: autotrophs, which uses inorganic carbon, okay, inorganic carbon, and heterotrophs, which uses organic carbon. So based on requirement of C, there are two types of organisms. One which uses inorganic forms of carbon. When I say inorganic forms of carbon, if you want to know the species, we have CO2, you have, so for example, carbonate and bicarbonate, okay. So these are inorganic forms of carbon. Organic forms means something which is attached with the organic molecule. So we have these heterotrophs and autotrophs. Autotrophs are also known as producers. Heterotrophs are also known as consumers. That means these consumers will be dependent on the producers for their food and energy requirement. And once we have these producers and consumers, once they complete their life cycle, what they undergo, they undergo breakdown. For example, there are these decomposers. For example, bacteria, fungi. Okay, these organisms are known as decomposers or saprotrophs. These are known as decomposers or saprotrophs because they are helping us in decomposing. For example, you may have noticed there is leaves that fall, there are organisms that die on soil. After some time, you are not able to see even the traces of those leaves or any organism which has died. It is because of these decomposing organisms. They decompose, and in the process, what they do, they return the nutrients back to the environment. To understand this basic concept, we will be building upon these basic concept to understand the overall functioning of ecosystem. So we have within producers we have primary producers, okay, and then within consumers we have primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and quaternary consumers. So herbivorous, primary carnivorous, large carnivorous, and omnivorous. Now some of this you may already have gone in school, some of these content, but it is good for you to go through this again because this is very basic elements which you will be requiring for further knowledge accumulation. Now, complete ecosystem will consist of four basic components. Okay? Biotic. Within biotic, we have producer, consumer, and decomposer, and abiotic. For example, pond. You can consider this example of pond. Okay, you can consider this example of pond. Now, if any one of these four components are missing, then it would be called as an incomplete system or dysfunctional system. For example, you can think of ocean depth or a cave. Will we find primary production in ocean depth or cave? I'm asking a very simple question. Will there be primary productivity to be seen in ocean depth or in a cave? Why?
Yes.
Yes
No,
or
sir.
no?
Lack of sunlight.
If there's a like
No,
geothermal vent, they
not
can.
light, not water.
Water is there, there will be no light.
So, but like I've seen like if there's a geothermal vent like a volcano or something, they can thrive there.
No, they can try. I'm asking about growth of algae. I'm not
Ocean.
asking about life.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not asking about any form of life. I'm asking a very simple question. Will there be primary production in ocean depth or in a cave? No. Okay, remember that. At ocean depth, there is no light. Now, based on this light depth, we also have this terminology euphotic depth. This is the depth where light penetrates in a water body. Suppose this is the water body and this is the whole water column. Now, this is the surface of the water body. Now, if we have this solar radiation, now this solar radiation will not go completely deep down in this water body. It would be stopped. It will be attenuated. We call it attenuation. Okay, light attenuation. So light gets attenuated as depth increases. Now that means the euphotic depth would be very confined to the surface water. Now that light attenuation depends on several factors. We'll come to it in a while, but for now, just understand. Now, clearer the water body, higher would be the euphotic depth. If water body is murky or dirty, for example, there will not be much penetration of light through the water column. Now, that's an example of that means light is an inorganic component. In its absence, primary production will be limited. So that brings us to this concept of productivity. Now, what is productivity? That means how productive an ecosystem can be. So the productivity of an ecosystem is the rate at which sun's energy is fixed by the vegetation of ecosystem. Vegetation means we have this primary production and plants, trees, for example. Now this primary productivity is reported. If you look at the units, it's gram per square meter per year. That means what is the rate of synthesis of biomass on an area in a year based on primary productivity. We have secondary productivity and then we have this net productivity. We'll come to this, but for now you understand what do we mean by productivity. For example, if you are in a water body, you are sitting in a water body, you're sitting in a water body, and you're trying to know how much algae is growing. Now, what you can do, you can collect water samples at regular intervals and measure what is the amount of chlorophyll. Now, chlorophyll will indirectly tell you what is the amount of algae that may be present, or there are other methods to filter algae and dry it and weigh the biomass. So, you'll be able to know what is the productivity. Now, once we have these ecosystems functioning, that means there are organisms, there are living organisms. Now, these living organisms can interact, and that interaction can have two types positive interaction and negative interaction. Now, what do we mean by positive and negative? It is based on the inhibitory effects. Suppose there are organisms which can cohabit and grow together, that means there is no inhibitory effect of one organism on the other. So here we will call it as a positive interaction. When one organism is affecting another, okay, that would be considered as negative interaction. Now, based on this positive and negative interaction, we have different types of relationships which we term as commensalism, proto-cooperation, and mutualism. So, positive interaction means the population help one another to grow and sustain. Now, this interaction need not to be that both the organisms will be benefited. It can either one organism get benefited, other organism is not affected, or both organism getting benefited. But there is no impact, no negative effect on the other organism for growth. So, based on these positive interaction, we have this commensalism, proto-cooperation, and mutualism. Now, let us see what they are.
Sir, can we say symbiosis also a positive?
Yes, okay. So, we have this commensalism. In this, one organism will derive benefit from the other, but other organism is not affected. Best example is cellulolytic fungi. Now, cellulolytic, if you break down this term, that means those fungi which have the potential to break down cellulose. Now, cellulose is a tough carbohydrate which we find in plants. Now, cellulolytic fungi produce organic acids from cellulose. Now, cellulolytic fungi have this capacity to break down the cellulose, and the breakdown product of cellulose are organic acids. Now, there are these organisms which cannot use cellulose directly, but through this activity of fungi, they are able to use the organic acids which is produced from cellulose, and this cell organic acid would serve as carbon source. Remember, all the organisms have huge requirement for carbon. Up to 60% of body weight is carbon biomass in terms of elements. So non-cellulolytic bacteria and fungi which do not have this ability to use cellulose directly, they would depend on the cellulolytic fungi. Other example is there are these growth factors which are synthesized by certain microbes and their excretion which allow growth of other organisms. So that's commensalism, where one organism is deriving benefit through the activity of another. Another example of positive interaction is proto-cooperation. Now, this is referred as non-obligatory mutualism. As we say non-obligatory, that means in this association, there is mutual benefit to the two species, but without the cooperation being obligatory or very strict requirement for their existence. Example, nitrogen fixing by azote water with cellulose as energy source, which provides cellulose decomposer is present to convert the cellulose to simple sugar organic acid. So this is an example of proto-cooperation. And then we have this mutualism where both the organism, both the species derive benefit through the activity of one another. So in this type of association, there's a close and often permanent and obligatory. So here we have non-obligatory in proto-cooperation. In mutualism, we have obligatory requirement. For example, symbiosis, and someone said symbiosis, so that's also part of mutualism. So symbiotic nitrogen fixation. So, for example, we have those nodule forming bacteria which grow in the root nodules, and what happens? These nodule bacteria are able to derive some nutrients, and in the process, they also supply nitrogen to the plant. So, after carbon, the other element which is required in highest quantity is nitrogen, and then we have phosphorus, and then there are other trace elements. So we have carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, which constitute the bulk of the elemental composition of organisms. Pollination is also an example of mutualism. Next, we have these negative interactions, where member of one population may consume members of other population. There can be competition over food. There can be excretion of harmful waste also, which would interfere with other populations. So this we can call as a survival strategy by organisms. For example, if you have some water with glucose, There is a competition between fungi and bacteria to use that glucose. Now, as the water gets more acidic, fungi generally outcompetes bacteria because fungi can grow at much more acidic environment compared to general types of bacteria that we have in the environment. So that's an example of negative interaction, where one organism is outcompeting the another organism, or there is competition over food, habitat, etc. So based on this negative interaction, we have these four types of association. One is competition, predation. You understand what is predation, parasitism, and antibiosis. What is competition? It is a condition in which there is a suppression of one organism as two species struggle for limiting quantities of nutrients or other requirement, either nutrient or habitat. So that means one organism would be able to suppress the growth of another organism. That's why we're calling it as a condition of negative interaction, and this sort of association is referred as competition. Predation, I don't have to tell you, you know what is predation. So where there is free living which catches and kills another species for food. Now most of the predatory organisms are animals, but there are some plants also which are carnivorous in nature, particularly fungi which feed upon other animals. And then we have this grazing and browsing by animals and plants, carnivorous plants such as Nepenthes, etc., which consume insects. And then we also have protozoa which feed on bacteria. Note down this protozoa, it also plays a very important role in wastewater treatment. We'll come to it when we go to module 3. So protozoa have a very important role in wastewater treatment. Next we have is parasitism. Now don't get confused with predation. Predation is where the free living animal is killed by another. Whereas parasitism is where a parasite which is living on or in the body of another organism and it uses that host for its nutritional requirement. Now this can be either temporary or permanent. Now typical parasite lives in its host without killing it because once the host is gone, the parasite also will not be able to survive. Whereas the difference between parasite and predator, in the case of predator, predator kills upon which it feeds. Okay, for example, viruses are the best examples because without a host, it will not be able to grow and reproduce and multiply. The last negative interaction that we will be seeing is antibiosis. Now, this is the phenomenon which we are using to get antibiotics. Now, the phenomenon of production of antibiotic is called antibiosis. There are different types of bacteria, fungi, which are able to produce different species, different chemicals, which we are able to use as antibiotic material. So, antibiotic is an organic substance which is produced by one organism in low concentration, which would limit the growth of another organism. But now we are able to use this for treating multiple infections. Remember, we do not have any antibiotics for viral infections. We have antibiotics only for bacterial infections. So it's a very important concept that you need to know. Once there is loss of resistance, we'll come to this resistance in water module, but since we are talking about antibiosis, it is good for you to discover what is the current status of knowledge on antibiotic resistance. Just note down this, and whenever you find time, you can do some additional reading which will improve your knowledge base. Okay. Next Next, we come after understanding come to understanding these ecosystem functions. So once you have understood what is the structure, next comes the function part. So here, when we say function, there are two types of system. One is related to energy and another one is related to matter. Energy flow and biogeochemical cycle. So that is what we will be understanding. When we say biogeochemicals, we have these bio, that means biological, geo means related to the geochemistry, and chemical means related to the type of element or compound that we are dealing with. If you just refer this diagram and see what you are able to understand before I explain, there are three processes which are interconnected, and that is showing the functioning of ecosystem. Just follow these. There is this different color coded arrows. One is yellow, one is blue, and the other one is green. And just see what these arrows are signifying, which will help you to understand how an ecosystem functions. Is it clear what you are able to see? Okay, we have this as a starting point, yellow one. There is flow of energy from sun. So then we have this primary production. From this primary producers, we are able to see consumers and producers, sorry, decomposers. So we have these producers, and then we have these consumers, and then there are these decomposers. So this is related to flow of energy, which is starting from sun, and then we have this cycling of water, and then there is this cycling of nutrients, which is shown in these green arrows. For example, there is fixation of this inorganic components by these plants, and these plants allow the consumers to be existing in the ecosystem. And once these plants and animals or any insects, once they complete their life cycle, they are degraded. And there is this phenomenon which is happening in the environment: degradation and transformation. There is linking of energy flow, and then there is linking of water cycle. So with water, we can say that cycling of hydrogen and oxygen. And now, once these elements are broken down and then they say recycle, sorry, they get cycled due to flow of water, hmm, we have this biogeochemical cycle. Now that's how these two processes are linked in an ecosystem function. Any question?
So please explain biogeochemical cycles once.
Biogeochemical cycle means, for example, say, okay, uh, there is some carbon in one of these leaf, some carbon. Just assume that we are following one leaf, and I'm saying that this leaf contains some carbon. Now, once this carbon is there in the leaf, there will be, say, grazing animals, for example. Grazing animals. That means the carbon that was there in the leaf, from the leaf, it went to this grazing animal. That's one aspect, one aspect of cycle, because life is involved in this cycle. And then this animal and this tree, suppose they complete their life cycle and they are on the soil and in water body, what will happen? There will be decomposition of plant matter and animal matter, which is dead. So decomposition will release these nutrients back to the environment, and then these nutrients will be available for helping other organisms to grow. That is what is related to biogeochemical cycle of any element you can think in terms of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, hydrogen, oxygen, etc. Okay, so that's what is this ecosystem function. So before we go further, it's important for us to stop and understand the energy flow. Okay, what is what type of energy flow is there in the environment? Now, if you want to understand, we can use these two laws of thermodynamics to understand first law of thermodynamics and second law of thermodynamics. For example, we know that first law states that energy can neither be created or not destroyed, and it can only change from one form to another. Now, if you go back to this example, there was this solar energy. It is not destroyed, but it is just getting converted to this leaf, and then from there it is going to other forms of life. Now, if you come to the second law, which informs us that energy is transferred from one level to another level, more of it is getting wasted. That means there is never 100% efficiency. Actually, it is much lower. We'll come to that topic. But for now, you understand these two laws, which help us to understand the concepts of ecology and ecosystem. That means we have this, say, 100 units of energy in producers. Out of this 100 units, only 10 units will go to consumer. Within consumers, we have phagotrophs, macro consumer, and micro consumer. Phagotrophs, macro consumer. Can you give examples? Can you give some examples of macro consumers? They are also known as phagotrophs. Have you heard this term before?
Sir, saprotrophs are like mushrooms.
Yes, mushrooms, micro consumer, bacteria, fungi. Okay,
Bacteria,
they are.
fungi.
They are the example of micro consumer. Now, give me some examples of macro consumers.
There any grazing animals, sir?
Uh,
Insects.
Insects, yes, insects, exactly. They are macro consumers. For example, if you're interested, read about the importance of macroinvertebrates in water bodies. Yeah, insects basically. Macroinvertebrates in water bodies. Note down this. I'm giving you three, four terminology for this session, which you can refer, and that will help you to gain some more in-depth information and additional knowledge. Now, we have these heterotrophs. That means we have producers, then consumers, and within consumers, we have macro consumers and micro consumers. Now, you can refer this with respect to aquatic ecosystem or forest ecosystem. Now, both these systems need nutrients, and as I told you, C and P would be the macronutrients, and then we have this other trace elements or micronutrients. So we have this macro. In any ecosystem, there would be importance of macronutrients and micronutrients. Macro means something which is required in high quantities. Micro means something which is required in trace quantities. Because, for example, many of these enzymes they require copper for functioning. Now, if this copper gets in higher concentration in the body of any organism or even humans, then it becomes toxic. Now, I think this is a simple exercise which you can easily do. Can you name some autotrophs, macro consumer and micro consumers? At least two of these. I think you can easily do that, and you have already done that. So that will help you to understand how these organisms play an important role in flow of energy within an ecosystem. Is that clear so far?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Good, good then. Let us proceed further. So as I already told you, photosynthesis means primary productivity. Now, if you go to any aquatic system and if you see that there is no algae, what will you say? You will quickly say that this aquatic system is dysfunctional or non-functional. If there are no algae, that means there are very good chances that higher forms of life will also be absent. Now, this is a small homework for you. Can you find places where there will be no algae? Or what sort of water bodies that will have very limited or no growth of algae? You can give me this answer in next lecture.
Sir, moving water.
Moving water we have. It's not that it will be very little. Just think which type of water bodies will not have algae or will not be able to support the growth of algae? Just think over it.
Sir, glaciers.
Think over it. Think about it. Don't go by your whatever you have would have read. Try to find some information, what I'm giving you as a small homework, and then you come up with the answer in next lecture. It is not a race that who will give the first answer. The objective is you develop some more knowledge, gain some more knowledge. Okay, fine. As I already told you, what is an autotroph? So, fungi producers are also known as autotrophs because they are able to synthesize their own food. Then we have these heterotrophs, which depend upon energy produced by primary producers. For any organism to metabolize, they need a source of energy and carbon. Carbon and energy. Based on these two, energy and carbon, we can classify microorganisms to different types. That will be a little bit of high-level information. We'll come to that, but for now, you confine your knowledge base to autotrophs and heterotrophs and their uh, requirements of energy and carbon. Now, herbivorous animals, they derive energy by ingesting plants or parts of it. We know that. And then carnivorous animals, they derive energy by ingesting herbivores. Now, you see that there is a linear relationship. Now, this sort of linear relation where there is first trophic level, second trophic level, and third trophic level, and this linear arrangement is referred as food chain. And don't get confused this food chain with food web. Food web is completely different concept. We'll come to it, but for now, understand that producers are in first trophic level, herbivorous are in second trophic level, and then we have this primary and secondary consumers which are there in the third trophic level. And then we have the tertiary consumer, that means the topmost consumer that is there in food chain. That would be the last level of food chain. So now what we see here, we have first trophic level, second trophic level, third trophic level, and the last level. You see that there is this linear arrangement. There is no interlinkages. That's why we are calling this as a food chain. Now we have three types of food chain. Okay, we have three types of food chain. One is known as grazing food chain, saprophytic or detritus food chain, and parasitic food chain. Now, what does grazing food chain tell us? Now, this is a normal food chain that we generally observe around us, in which there are plants which are producers and the energy flow from producer to herbivorous to carnivorous and so on. You can refer these diagrams that is there in the left of this slide. So we have this autotrophs, herbivorous, primary carnivorous, secondary carnivorous. You see there is linear arrangement. That's why we are calling this as food chain. There are plants, grasshopper, scorpion, and then we have this kid fox. And then squirrel, and then the squirrel will be consumed by eagle or for example or a fox. So there is this first trophic level, second trophic level, third trophic level, and fourth trophic level. First trophic level will be made of primary producers, second trophic level primary consumers, and then third trophic level secondary consumers. Examples are there in the diagram, and then the final is tertiary consumer. Now what happens at each of these trophic level? Some energy is lost. Now we have to understood that there is not 100% transfer of energy. That means efficiency is not 100%. Now the good question that comes to our mind is, now where does this energy is getting lost and in what form? This energy is lost in the form of heat and when organisms respire. So it's not that algae, they are just going to be produced as biomass. So you cannot translate whatever carbon that is there in the form of biomass. Some of that carbon will also be used by algae to support its metabolic activities. So there is this loss of heat and respiration, which helps us to account for the energy that is not getting transformed from one trophic level to another. So as the trophic level increases, the available energy decreases as one moves from first trophic level to higher levels. Now, next type of food chain is detritus food chain or saprophytic food chain. Now, in this type of food chain, there will be this dead organic matter which occupies the lowermost level of the food chain, and from this dead organic matter which is occupying at the base of food chain, we have other organisms. Now, once there is dead organic matter, then we will be able to see decomposers and other type of organisms. Suppose in a forest, if you see that there is a tree log which has fallen, now what will be the type of organisms? There you will not see this grazing food chain. There you will see this detritus food chain, because these decomposing organisms will be releasing the nutrients in the vicinity, and that will allow the growth of other type of organisms. So that's detritus food chain or saprophytic. Now detritus means non-living organic material which is particulate in nature. Particulate means which is coarse, something which is not in dissolved form. Okay, particulate. Detritus means non-living organic matter which is in particulate form. You can note down this. I'm sure many of you may be hearing this term for first time. And then we have this parasitic food chain. Now, parasitic food chain, here we have large organism which can be either producer or consumer, which is getting exploited, and thereby food is passing to smaller organisms from these large organisms. So that's an example of parasitic food chain. So we have these three types of food chain which are commonly seen: 1, 2, and 3. Stop here for this lecture, because next topic, if I start, will not be able to go further. And if you have anything which is not understood or not clear, you can ask. Yes, someone has written extremely saline water bodies since oxygen is scarce there. But it is the algae which is producing oxygen. Algae will not require oxygen to grow. Algae would require carbon dioxide for its growth.
Sir, will you share the notes?
Yes, I have already uploaded yesterday's PPT in the file section. And the password I have already given you in yesterday's lecture to access those.
Sir, what is the password?
I have already told yesterday. You can get it from your classmates. I've told it a few times yesterday. And one more thing, I'm still seeing that there are students who come in and join very late. So please make this a habit that you try to come on time every day. Because coming late does not reflect very good on anyone. And since you are in very early stage of